Of Digital Classroom. Now this time it's very special because it's a rebroadcast actually, because yesterday something went wrong with our audio on YouTube. It kept on buffering, so today we're going to try it again. Today the perfect workflow. I'm going to ask Anna if she can turn around the camera a little bit so I can see myself in the display, and then we are ready to go. So today's topic is actually the perfect workflow. And why is that so important? Well, we can only spend our money once, right? So we want to make sure that we do it very wisely. And gear is something that has to work for you and not against you. So today we're going to discuss everything that I experienced in the past, which actually really slowed down my workflow. And we're going up to a point where I think that I found the perfect workflow for now. Because one of those things, with progress in technology, it will always change and it will always get better. So guys, are you ready for Digital Classroom? I am. So there we go. Okay, so today we're going to do it with a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation because I want to make sure that you guys get everything, and you can also pause the video, of course, and take a look at what's on the screen. So, although I say the perfect workflow, again, it's never 100% perfect for everybody. So, take the points that I give you in this small broadcast and take out the points that you think are interesting for you. Let's start. Now, Digital Classroom, of course, is made possible already for a lot of years by BenQ and Rogue. But we recently also welcomed a new partner, actually a few days ago, and that's Cascable. Now, Cascable doesn't sound weird for a lot of you guys because I've been using Cascable, I think, for a year now to shoot tethered to the iPad Pro, but later more on this. Another partner that we're very proud to introduce for Digital Classroom is actually Calibrite. Calibrite was already a partner for us for many years for behind the closed doors, but they now also are, of course, a partner for Digital Classroom. And Calibrite, we all know, of course, from their great tools for color management, like, for example, color analyzers, but also the color checkers. And, of course, still BenQ and Rogue. And this episode, only this episode, is also made possible by Synology. And you probably already know why, because we're also going to talk about backup strategies and what I use for backups. And Synology is a brand that we've trusted for many years. And before our photography, we also ran a computer company for, I think, 20 plus years. And Synology was without a doubt one of the brands that we had the least problems with. And they have great customer support, and they're really aimed at photographers. So Synology, thank you so very much for making this episode possible. Now, let's first talk about gear. Now, we all know the expression gear acquisition syndrome, right? And that actually means that we always want more gear. But let's just take a step back. Is it really the gear, or is it the stuff that you guys do? In my opinion, it's always the stuff that you guys do with the gear. So is gear really important? Yes, of course. I'm shooting with Sony cameras, and in my opinion, Sony is one of the leading manufacturers in camera technology. But does that mean that Canon or Nikon are bad cameras, or Fuji? No, of course not. It's just a choice that you make. And let's be honest, nowadays you can even make great images with your, let me grab one, with your phone. So it doesn't really matter what gear you use. It's all in your head. But most of all, it's the stuff that goes beyond the photo. Because the photo is great to take, but what do you do afterwards? How do you store the photo? How do you retouch the images? And everything else. So we're going to talk about that too. Let's see, YouTube is still going great. We don't have any errors like yesterday, so that's awesome. Now here you see an image of my laptop with a color checker and the light meter. But do I really always use a laptop? And this is the part where I first want to talk about. Laptop versus desktop. Now, if you would have asked me 5 or 6 years ago, Frank, can you do everything on a laptop? I would have looked at you and I said, no, I'm very sorry. I can retouch my images on a laptop without any problems, but video editing, especially with multicam, no. Well, this actually changed a lot during the time because, well, what happened with Apple when they released the M1 chip? Now, if you own a DJI drone, you know that the DJI drones actually film in H.265. And that's a very heavy codec. So when I opened that up on my PC, and that's a really fast PC, or on my Mac, it stuttered like crazy. And then I saw a video where they opened it up on an iPad Pro, and it just went very smoothly. And I was going like, that's impossible. So I bought an iPad Pro and LumaFusion, of course, and it works like a charm. So on my iPad Pro, I can edit video better than on my desktop. And that actually triggered me to buy the new MacBook Pro M1, and that changed everything. I have a PC here for about €3,500 and I don't use it anymore. You know what the main advantage is? If you own a laptop and you do everything on your laptop, there's one thing that's very dangerous, of course. If your laptop breaks down, your whole business stops. So maybe it's wise to have 2 laptops. Yeah, that's very expensive, I know, but maybe buy a MacBook Pro and maybe an older one that's compatible with everything that you use. So if anything goes wrong, you can still continue your work. But what is that big thing about the laptop? Because I already hear you guys going like, hey Frank, but there's only 3 ports, USB-C, and it's very limited. And what if I come into the studio and have to connect everything? Yeah, that's a big problem. So that's why in our studio and also at home, we use the OVC docks. Now there are many brands that make these kinds of docks, like for example Hyper and OVC. We actually advise to buy something from OVC or Hyper. Those brands are known to be very good, very reliable and compatible. If you buy one that's a little bit cheaper, I don't know if everything still works. We had some problems, for example, with wired Ethernet. We had some problems with HDMI. And with the OVC and the Hyper, it just all went great. So the main advantage of using something like this and a MacBook Pro is that the MacBook Pro is actually fed by USB-C. So you don't really need a power adapter. So when I come home, I just place my laptop on the disk, I just put in one cable, and at that moment all the monitors are connected, all my wired connections are there, my NAS is accessible, and of course all the external hard drives are accessible by just using one dock. The main advantage of using on one display, the main advantage of using one device is that all my presets are always up to date. All my filters are up to date. Everything just works like a charm. And that I think is very, very important in a perfect workflow. When I use different devices, it always happens that, well, I came home, I wanted to do a retouch, and oh, I didn't update my presets yet. Then I started using my presets on OneDrive or Dropbox. Worked like a charm. But then my license was locked because I can only use it on one computer. You know where I'm going, right? Using one device is awesome. Up until a few years ago, it was not possible. Now it is. So I highly advise you guys get a laptop, a nice dock, and now you can work on all locations. But how does the iPad fit in this? Because, you know, I'm a big advocate of using the iPad in your retouching or in your photo shoots. The thing is, with a laptop, you still have an operating system that has to boot up. You have to keep it up to date. You work with drivers, you work with different software manufacturers, updates in the OS, and everything can go wrong or doesn't really work together sometimes. When you have an iPad Pro, it's a pretty locked down system. You just power it on and it just works. If you don't update the apps and it works, next time it will work too. So this is why I really like the iPad Pro. Because what is the most frightening thing to do as a photographer or as an educator? Well, we saw it yesterday. If the internet doesn't work with me, well, I can do the stream again because, well, technology, right? If technology fails, it's not the fault of the photographer, it's not the fault of anything else. It's just something that happens. With an iPad Pro, the chances are very low. Now also, when you look at when we're working outside, we need of course a long battery life. The iPad Pro will run a full day without any problems. But we also need a lot of light output from our devices. The MacBook Pro is very bright, the iPad Pro is even brighter. But Apple did something else, and that's really cool for us as retouchers. Now in this slide you see on the left side, sorry I'm checking YouTube sometimes on the side, so don't worry. On the left side you see an icon from AstroPad. Now, many years ago, AstroPad already released an app on the iPad and on the MacBook, of course, where you can use your iPad Pro to retouch in the full-blown Photoshop. Now, the first versions, I have to be honest, weren't 100% perfect. But nowadays, AstroPad works like a charm. But you don't really need AstroPad anymore. When you look at what Apple is doing a very nice combination of your iPhone, your iPad and your MacBook. And it means that if you have your iPad next to your MacBook, you can literally just drag and drop files over to your iPad Pro. See it as a little bit of AirDrop, but way faster and a little bit easier to use. Although AirDrop already is very easy to use, but okay. But they also have something where you can use your Apple Pencil and mirror the screen from your MacBook Pro or from your Mac. And this opens up so many possibilities to retouch with the Apple Pencil in the full-blown Photoshop. Now here you guys going like, hey Frank, but what about hard keys? I need the Shift key, I need the Control key, I need the Alt key. Well, both AstroPad and Apple has a great solution for that by hovering buttons of the hard keys. So in other words, if you need the space bar, you have a little button on the side where you can press and that mimics the space bar. Or of course you can use a keyboard like this. So there are many solutions nowadays. But is it really perfect to retouch? Let me put it this way. If you aren't used to anything else, the iPad Pro connected to a MacBook Pro works like a charm. It really works great. But I was also using before tablets. And with a tablet, you still have a little bit better control over your stylus, but most of all you have hard keys and hard dials. And those hard dials really make a difference, because now you can literally retouch almost blindly, and with the dials you can very quickly change the brush size or skew your canvas or whatever you want to do. So that's why on the right side I still have a logo from XP Pen. Now there are many brands out there, of course, that give you touch displays and displays where you can retouch on. In my opinion, the software and the support from XP Pen is very good. So I highly advise, especially for the price, to get one of those XP pens. You can literally buy a pen display for, I believe, under 200 or 300 euros. And when you retouch on a pen display once, you're hooked, trust me. You don't want to go back to the normal tablets, which we know which didn't have a display, right? Now there are some tricks with the display that I really want to point out, but we're going to do that as soon as we hit the monitors. Okay, and that's actually the next topic, monitors. Now we all know, of course, that a monitor is the display that gives you the view of your images. So in other words, you shoot your images, you want to see those images, and on the back of the camera it's small, so you use a monitor. But what kind of monitor should you buy? Well, you already see it here. We're using the BenQ monitors. And there's a reason for this. One, they are very good in their performance, but they're also affordable. And when you look at the package you get, they're pretty complete. You get a hood on most monitors, so you don't have any problems with light scattering. You have hardware calibration, which in my opinion is very important, because when you do the calibration in the computer, you're using software. But when you do it in the monitor, you don't use the software in the computer. So you don't have any weird... Let me put it this way. If you do a hardware calibration, it just looks way smoother and you get less errors. So hardware calibration is a big plus for us. It also uses the lockup table, of course, in the monitor, which just gives you better performance. But also the screen material is very important. When you go into a store and you look at images, most people will find the monitor that gives you the most brightest picture, the vibrant colors. That's the monitor they want to do for retouching, right? And that's actually the wrong choice. Because if you use a glossy monitor, you are thinking that you have a lot of contrast in your images. But when you print, those images will look very flat. Also, when you have a glossy monitor and there's a light source somewhere, it will reflect like crazy on the monitor. So when you're outside, you constantly are adjusting your monitor on your laptop, and it just is a terrible way to work on a laptop. So always choose a matte screen or a slide glass. It's one of the things I think Apple can still improve on their laptops. Give it a little bit less of that glossy look. But also the color space is important. Now let me first explain to you guys what a color space is. Now we all know that we see colors, right? Our primary colors are red, green and blue. Our secondary colors are cyan, magenta and yellow. Now all those colors together create an image, right? And we of course want to see that image, but we also have to, well, agree upon where do red land, where does green land. And those coordinates are always in three: your saturation, your hue and your luminance. And those coordinates are fixed. And when those coordinates are fixed, we call them a color space. Now you all know from Photoshop probably the sRGB color space. Now that's a small color space, 8 bits, JPEG, no problem. Now when you go to Adobe RGB, that's a slightly bigger color space. Now you can still get away with 8 bits JPEG, but I highly advise you guys, if you store it in JPEG, use 12 as a setting or 10, but don't go too low. And you may or may not have seen Pro Photo RGB. Now, Pro Photo RGB is a huge color space. There are hardly any monitors that really support it. There are no printers that really support it. And it's a 16-bit color space. So if you add it in Pro Photo RGB, you can't store it in JPEG. If you do, you will see weird artifacts in the shadows, sometimes a little bit of brownish tints. It just doesn't work. So my advice is work in Adobe RGB. And if you want to do it really well, store it in TIFF. But in most cases, JPEG 12 is more than enough, especially if you don't retouch again those images. So on the monitors, we have monitors that are, of course, Adobe RGB, 89%, 99%. Those monitors are great, but also a little bit expensive. Now, if you still want to have something where you can retouch your images on, but you don't have the money for Adobe RGB, there are also monitors, also in the BenQ lineup, they are called P3 monitors. Those monitors are somewhere in between sRGB and Adobe RGB. They still give you a great reference to retouch. You can still retouch in Adobe RGB, but you don't spend a lot of money on an Adobe RGB monitor. So for an enthusiastic photographer, a P3 monitor is actually a great solution. So for me, BenQ is without a doubt the choice for the most complete package, great performing monitors and that hardware calibration. And because BenQ has been a sponsor for so many years, let's take a look at one of the videos that BenQ sent us. And it's about the SW321C monitor. Okay. Now, of course, let me see if I'm correct. Yes. Now, of course, we all know Pantone, right? And recently Pantone changed their whole subscription plan. And for most enthusiastic photographers, that doesn't really change a lot. But if you're a graphic designer, it actually means that you don't have access to Pantone colors anymore. I don't know why they did it, but hey, they did it. So they open up the road for competition, right? But BenQ, as a brand, actually find Pantone very important, and I agree with it. If you're a graphic designer, Pantone is without a doubt one of the leading forms of calibration and of course of using of your colors. And that's why I'm very proud, and of course BenQ is proud, to introduce their world first Pantone system. And when you buy certain BenQ monitors, you also get a subscription to Pantone. So if you're a graphic designer, that will probably push you towards BenQ even more. So if you want great monitors, great color, hardware calibration, and Pantone, just go for the BenQ monitors. I highly recommend them. I've been using them for years now and they perform greatly. Okay, so now let's talk about calibrations. And I think this is one of the things that really gets a lot of people excited, but also scared. Now, a little bit of backside information. Besides our photography studio, we also run a home theater company. And I'm an ISF trained calibrator. So that means that we calibrate displays, projectors, video walls to the ISF standard, the Image Science Foundation. And those settings are a little bit different from what we use as photographers, but all the color management stuff actually combines very nicely. So I'm going to give you some tips about how you can calibrate your monitor, your camera and your printer and make them all work very nicely together. Now on this screen you see two of the devices that I use a lot. Those are the color checkers. Now of course the first thing in our chain is the camera. Now if you ever shot with Canon and Nikon next to each other, you just know that Canon and Nikon give slightly different colors. Same with Sony, but even Sony's underneath, they will give slightly different colors. So how do you get them correctly? One of the easiest things of course is to set white balance. That already changes a lot. But then still some colors are a little bit more saturated, some colors are a little bit more to the left or to the right. It just isn't 100% correct. And that's where those color checkers come in. Now this is actually the new one, this is the Duo. And when you open up this one you see something really nice. This one is for video, so you can set your white point, your black point and your middle point, and you can set your colors. For example, if you use DaVinci Resolve or Premiere, you can set your colors with this. And if you open up the other side, this is for photography, and this I really like. When you look at the image on the left, oh, let me restart that very quickly. When you look at the image on the left, you see that they always had this part, but this top part I never used, and I also never saw the use for it. I'm using a color checker to make neutral colors and a neutral profile. The top part was more like, how do you like it? Do you like a little bit more red? Oh, I want to do that later in Photoshop. So I'm very happy that they now included a white balance patch on the top, because now you just shoot it like this, use white balance for this, so you have a great surface for white balance, and this part you use for creating your profile. The Duo is a little bit more expensive of course than the normal color checker, but if you also do video you normally need two color checkers, and now you can all get them in one because the Duo is video and photography. The brand is Calibrite, and you probably knew them under their previous name X-Rite. And Calibrite is actually the same equipment, just a different team, and they're still the great quality we are used to. Now of course, after the camera you want to do your monitor, right? So look at the slide in the top left. That's our Color Checker Display Plus. I have to look at it for the moment. So this is a 3 stimulus meter, and it's one of the most easiest to use devices. You just place it in front of your monitor, make sure that there's no scatter light hitting your monitor, and you just run through the software. If you very carefully and you don't want to do anything wrong, you just put it on auto. You just select desktop or of course laptop, and you just follow the instructions on the screen and you're set to go. If you want it a little bit more interesting, you can always go for advanced, and I'm going to give you some settings for that in a moment. The other solution you see on the right is actually the Color Checker Studio. Now those are also in versions that you can use for your printer. Now you have to be very careful when you use it for the printer. If you use it for the printer, you have to make sure that you print on the paper you are going to use and you use the ink you're going to use. Otherwise it doesn't make any sense. We recently talked to somebody who said, I don't know, it doesn't really work. I don't want to spend my expensive paper on it. So I said, okay, stop. So you printed the color checker on different paper that you're going to use. And somehow he didn't connect the dots. As soon as I told him you have to use the paper and the inks, he called me back a few days later and he said, now the calibration is great. So do you really need an expensive analyzer for your printer? Yeah, well, on one side I say yes. On the other side, if you use an Epson printer, you use Epson inked and Epson paper, and you download the profile from Epson, that's pretty okay. So in my opinion, they are pretty expensive. If you print a lot, without any doubt buy one. If you are an enthusiastic photographer or you don't print a lot, I wouldn't bother. I would just get one of those displays and just use that one, because the display is very important. Your screen has to be perfect in calibration. Okay. So, because Calibrite, of course, is our sponsor, we thought of something that would be a little bit of fun to do with you guys. Now, we always have to shoot a color checker during a photo shoot. If you change your lighting setup, you don't really have to shoot it. But if you are shooting for a client, I highly advise everything you change, shoot an image with the color checker. It's very easy to do. And over the years, I actually started a joke like, okay, here you have the color checker, hold it in front of your face, but you have to make a funny face, otherwise the software won't recognize the color checker. And that's actually why we started the funny faces of the color checker many years ago. And then COVID broke out, and I actually forgot a little bit about it. And we talked with Calibrite last week, and we said, you know what, let's start it up again, but now let's use the hashtag #FunWithCalibrite. So if you guys are also bored with shooting the color checkers in every shot, like very serious, why so serious? Let's have some fun with Calibrite. So if you have a great shot of your color checker, just hashtag it with #FunWithCalibrite, and maybe we start a competition or something. Let's see how it works out. Okay. Now, my iPad sometimes just switches over, sorry for that. So what settings to start with? Now, if you do the auto settings, you don't have to worry about anything. But if you want to do the advanced settings, and that's actually what I advise you guys because it's a little bit more secure, use the following settings. As white point, D65 or 6500 degrees Kelvin. Use a gamma of 2.2, or if you do a lot of video, 2.4. Make sure that you calibrate first on Adobe RGB. If you have an Adobe RGB monitor, by the BenQ monitors, also select the input for Adobe RGB. Now, if you see that there are a lot of delta errors, and you see that when you compare the calibration at the end of the calibration session, then you could try to calibrate the same settings, but now use native. The difference is when you choose variable, at that point you can better calibrate on native. Then it will just go like, okay, red doesn't want to go any further, stop. So it's not a perfect calibration, but at least it's way better than clipped color channels. So just experiment with it. First Adobe RGB, check your report at the end. If you see a lot of errors, then try native, compare the two, and just work with both for a week, and you know pretty much what works for you. The other thing is the light output. Now, when you buy a monitor for gaming or for movie watching, you want a lot of light output, you want contrast, you want brightness, right? But when you do photography, we're often working in darker areas, and we also deliver for prints. It's very easy to underexpose everything a little. And in the software, I highly advise you guys to set anything between 110 and 130 nits. Personally, I'm always at 130 nits because I like that little bit of extra pump. But if you do a lot for print, it's actually better to go to 110. At first, it will look very dull, but trust me, as soon as you start printing, you will be very happy because now the prints look way closer to what you have on your monitor. The other thing is the profile, and this is where a lot of people go wrong. There are two problems, very subtle, but if you go from Lightroom to Photoshop, you sometimes see a color difference. And that's when you're running version 4. If you don't see any color difference, you go from Lightroom into Photoshop and everything looks great, that's probably version 2. So in other words, if you don't see any color difference, you are right. If you see a color difference, do the calibration again and try to switch to version 2. Okay, let's see, we still have a great connection, so that's going great. Now, one of the most made mistakes, and this happens a lot, so don't think, oh, I'm not going to do that. Check it, because you don't want to know how many people do this by accident and they think they're absolutely wrong. Absolutely right, sorry. Profile, choose them any other way. In other words, if you use the Color Checker Passport, this is the profile you use for your camera. So in Lightroom, Capture One, On One, or whatever software you use, you select that profile for your camera. So not Adobe Vivid, Adobe Vintage or whatever. No, the profile you create from the Color Checker. And by the way, the Color Checker has software. You can use it on the desktop for ICC and DCP profiling, or you can use it straight into Lightroom as a plugin for the DCP profiling. It's very simple. So for your camera, you use that profile. For your monitor, you use the profile that is created for that monitor. And that actually all goes automatically, so just forget about it. Give it a name, for example, BenQ March 2023. And then the next time you calibrate, it's BenQ, of course, April 2023, if you do it every month. But you don't touch that preset anymore. It's hidden, it's in your OS. And for your printer, you have a different profile. And you only use that profile when you start printing. Now, why do I tell you guys like this? A lot of people, they calibrate their monitor, they calibrate their color checker, and then they start opening Photoshop and they go like, oh, wait a minute, I'm working on a BenQ monitor, so Photoshop asks you what color space. And the problem is, when you open up that slider, you see all the color spaces. You see Adobe RGB, sRGB, ProPhoto RGB, but you also see the BenQ March. You also see your color checker, so which one should you choose? And a lot of people choose actually their monitor or their camera. They start editing and they immediately see that something is wrong, so they start adjusting colors. Yeah, don't. You're actually doing double color management. So, your calibration is for the device you're using. After that, you just forget it. As soon as you're in Photoshop, you are retouching in a color space. Don't mix those two up. Backups. As you know, we actually owned a computer company for over 20 years. And one of the biggest issues was always data loss. And let's be honest, data loss is the most terrible thing that can happen to you. If I lose photos, I still have the negatives. If I lose my negatives, I still have my prints, right? But if you use digital photography, you use digital files. And if you lose a digital file, it's gone forever. It will never come back unless you have a backup. Hey Frank, come on, backups are very expensive. Yes, I know, backups are incredibly expensive. But think about this. If I tell you that yesterday you lost all your images, all your life's work, how much would you be willing to pay to get everything back? What do I hear? 10,000 euros? 20,000 euros? Probably yes. If you had the money, you would probably pay $1 million to get everything back. But you don't need to. When we're on location, we're using the Transcend or LaCie drives, and they're very reliable. You just connect them via USB-C on your laptop, and you can store a lot of data. If you need speed, use an SSD. For me, I just use spinner drives. 4 terabytes on a spinner drive works like a charm. We don't need any speed, we just need storage. At home, it's a little bit different. As you can see here, we're using 2 8-bay Synology NASes. Those NASes are connected via the network, and they're pretty fast. And you do have to remember that you're not working on the NAS. The NAS is just storage. In Lightroom, you mostly work with your database. And my database in Lightroom is on an external, very fast SSD drive. So Lightroom works very, very fast. The NAS is only there when I need a file. So you don't need a very fast access. Of course, when you do video editing, yeah, it's very handy if you can copy files really fast, but with photography the files aren't that big and a NAS works like a charm. So why 2 NASes? Because a NAS is redundant, right? If the one drive fails, you just put in a new drive, it rebuilds and you're done. Yeah, that's 100% true. A NAS is very safe. But what if, and just think about this, and you don't want to think about this, what if a NAS fails? What if your power supply just at one day says, Frank, you know what, I'm gonna retire, bye-bye. And that NAS is 10 years old. How the heck are you ever going to get the same NAS to rebuild your RAID? That's not possible. So, what I highly advise you guys, and I know it costs a lot of money, is get 2 of the same NASes and fill them up with drives that are meant for NAS use. Now, why do I tell you guys drives that are meant for NAS drives? Very simple. If you buy a hard drive, there's only a few euros in difference between a NAS drive and a normal drive. And a lot of people will go for the normal drive because, hey, it's 7200 RPM, it's faster, it's nicer, it looks better, and it's a little bit cheaper than that 4500 RPM drive that's, forget about it. Just think about this. There's one thing very certain about a hard drive. It will fail. There's also another thing very certain. It will always happen at the moment you don't want it to fail. And that's a given. Now, those normal consumer drives, I believe, are rated for 2 years continuous work. That's not a lot in a NAS, because a NAS is on constantly, 24/7. So, those NAS drivers are designed slightly different. They're not as fast, they're not as flashy, but they can run for 5 or 6 or 7 years. And that's a huge difference, especially when you think about investments, because let's be honest, you can only spend your money once. So, should you buy all your drives at once from the same manufacturer, from the same supplier? In all our years of experience, I can only say don't do that. Try to buy your drives from separate from separate suppliers. I do like to have them all the same, but not in the same batch. When we ran the computer company, we didn't have a lot of drives that failed, but if drive failed, you could almost bet on it that a few other drives would come in with the same serial number. So if you have a NAS, you don't want 2 or 3 drives to fail at the same time. So what we normally do is on 1 week and a week we'll order 2 or 3 drives via one supplier, then the next week 2 or 3 from another supplier, and then the next week we will buy the rest, and then we combine those in one NAS. And that actually saves you a lot of trouble by if something fails. Now, how do we keep those NASs in sync? There are many solutions, and Synology again is a company that is very, very good for photography because they think about that kind of stuff. Like when we walk into our home, everything starts to unload immediately on our NASs, and we have a separate folder that's actually automatically imported into Lightroom. So that works like a charm. We can also make albums via photos, which we can share with my parents or with clients. But most of all, for the important stuff, we use or a USB copy, where you can combine external USB drives with the Synology NAS, just via the USB port. And with USB copy, you can just set up a schedule, like every Sunday, we want to make a backup from the NAS to the USB. Now, because we use a lot of data, we don't use the USB option, but we actually use 2 the same NASs, and we just connect them to each other, and they just mirror each other. Now, with Synology, you can also place one NAS, for example, in the studio and one NAS at home, and they will just keep updating over the internet. For us, they're in the same location, because we also use SMugMug to back up all our data. But the best solution is actually to store both NASs in different locations. Okay, then we're going to talk about something that's very important as soon as you start shooting, and that's tethering. Now, what is tethering? When we shoot our images, we want to make sure that our client and our model, and of course also ourselves, know how the images look. Did we nail the focus? How does it look in black and white? Is everything really nicely lit? And when you look on the back of your camera, it's often a small display, not very bright, and it's not something where you can really judge your images on. And imagine always those customers next to you, looking over your shoulder, especially after COVID. We don't want people too close, right? So shooting to a big screen is awesome. Now, there are several solutions. You can go for wireless, which I highly disencourage for the very simple reason it always works great in your home, but as soon as you go on location, it doesn't work anymore, or it's very slow, or you lose connection. It's very frustrating. So I love to shoot with a wire. And in the past, of course, we used a lot of different solutions, starting with the yellow cable to a CRT monitor, up towards real tethering cables. And over the years, I found out a lot of problems we had with tethering cables. And the biggest problem was actually the length. Most cables that you buy online are 4.7 or 5 meters in length. That may sound like a lot, but it isn't. If you're on location and you're shooting on a laptop or an iPad, it's often at 1.5 meters height. So the cable already goes down 1.5 meters. I'm almost 2 meters, so when I shoot, it also goes up, let's say 1.5 meters. So I'm already losing 3 meters of that 5. So I can only move around my desktop or my laptop for 2 meters, which isn't a lot. When I move further, the cable already gets off the floor, and it only increases the risk of tripping and, of course, doing a lot of damage. Now, when using a 10-meter cable, you solve this problem immediately. Plus, you can walk much farther in your studio. With a 10-meter cable, I can shoot through the whole studio, I can reach every corner, and it just works like a charm. Now, you might say, Frank, why not connect a 4.7 meter with a 4.7 meter, and that way you also have 10 meters? Yeah, the main problem is that those connections aren't very secure. We did it for many years, and at one point, especially when the cables become older, you use tape, you use connectors, it just doesn't really work. So that's why we switched over to another brand, and that's called IQwire, the red cables. This is the 10-meter cable, and as you can see in the cables, there are actually inline boosters. And this is why we can run 10-meter cables without any in-between pieces. This is one cable. We also have them in 5 meters, and we also have one booster in the 5 meters. Now, the thing that sets IQwire apart from any other brand on the market is those inline boosters, but also the IntelliConnect inside the connectors. In essence, if I say it really simple to you guys, a computer knows how fast a camera can work. If you have a piece of software that literally tells your computer, don't pull again, this is the maximum speed, keep it that speed. it means that the connection to the computer goes way faster. And we are the distributor for this cable, so this is why we talk a lot with customers. We hear a lot from the customers that the first connection is just as fast as any other cable, but after that, if they lose connection by taking the cable out or turning the camera off, as soon as they turn the camera on again, it's immediately there. Also during trade shows, a lot of people come up to me like, hey Frank, you're shooting 60 megapixels RAW, right? Yes. How the heck is it possible that they come in so smoothly? There's no stuttering. It's just, if you shoot 80 frames, they come in 80 frames in exactly the same speed. That's the IntelliConnect and the boosters from the IQwires. But there's more. If you see in the picture, we're using so-called angled connectors. Let me take this one. Now the angled connector is very important because think about this. If your camera lays on the floor, where it's often, right, don't place your camera high because it can fall, so you always place your camera on the floor, but it can still trip over. With a straight cable, it will trip on the cable and it will still get a lot of tension on the port. With an angled cable, it will just roll over the cable. You can still damage your port, of course, but the chance goes down tenfold. So always use angled connectors. And one of the cool things I think about IQwire, and you see that on the left side, is actually all the boosters are lit. So that means in a dark studio, you literally see your cable running. So a lot of people that normally would stand on your cable now go like, oh, there's a cable, and don't stand on it. That saves you a lot of money. Another thing, of course, is we have to make sure that the port is connected. Because those ports, to replace them, is very expensive, and you lose your camera for a few weeks. You don't want that, right? And this is why we actually brought this on the market. This is our own product. And over the years, I worked with a lot of solutions. And one of the things that always frustrated me was when I want to get them off or get them on, I always needed a screwdriver or a coin. So when we designed this one, we said to the manufacturer, we want to make sure that there's this little handle where people can just easily take it on and off, as you can see here on the picture. Another thing that we heard from a lot of customers was when they are bigger, they hurt their hands. And the battery won't open up. So you need to take it off, open up, put the battery in, take it down, close it up again. You don't want to do that during a photo shoot. You just want to make sure that the battery comes out, or you use a grip. So we actually wanted a smaller device, so it also fits smaller cameras. We still have, of course, the routing inside for a big cable or a smaller cable. And it's, of course, 100% ARCA compatible. So that means if you use an ARCA tripod, you can very simply put on the cable block and then put it on your stand and you can start shooting. Very, very secure. Now, when you look at the competition, they sell them for about 100 euros. We sell them for 35 euros on our web shop. And the cool thing is, if you buy the 10-meter cable IQwire from our dealers or from ourselves, you get the cable block totally for free in the package. And IQwire is sold by several dealers now all throughout Europe and of course the Netherlands. So just go to your favorite camera store and say, hey, I want an IQwire with the cable block, and they will give you one. And recently we also started, of course, our cooperation with Cascable. So in the new packaging you will also find a nice card for Cascable. Now, one of the things that frustrated me the most was when you switched cameras. And a lot of our customers actually have different cameras in their studio, but also different computers. And those cables aren't very cheap. So you want to make sure that if you use different cameras, you of course also are able to use your IQwire cable on all those cameras and all those laptops. Now the first thing we have is a so-called USB-A converter. Now, this is this one. You just click it on the USB-C and now you can use it on any computer that has a normal USB connector. But of course you also have cameras with different connectors, for example mini USB or micro USB. And normally you would need a new cable for that too. Not with us. We have smaller pigtails, and the cool thing about these is there are female USB-Cs, so you don't need any in-between pieces, which also of course deteriorates your data flow. You just plug it into your USB-C on your IQwire and then you just go into your camera. So one cable to rule them all. You only need to spend your money once, right? If you want the cable block, I will show you very quickly where you can get them for the 35 euros I was talking about. That's on our own store. But if you go to iqwire.nl, you can actually see all the dealers that are selling IQwire, and they're getting more and more every day. So if you have a company and it's interested in also distributing or buying the IQwire cables, just drop us an email and we will set you up. It's a really cool brand. I've been using them now for over a year, and I'm still using the same cable I started with, and it still looks like brand new and it still works like a charm. Okay, the next thing is software. So of course, now we have had calibrations, we know which monitor you use, we know how to tether. Now, how the heck should we tether it? Because, well, you still need software, right? The first thing I really want to point out to you guys, also for retouching, is of course the Adobe Creative Cloud. I know, there are many different guys that hate the subscription, but let's be honest, we're all going to subscription anyway. And I don't think it's fair. In the past, when we did an upgrade for Adobe, it was always about 1,000 euros or 1,500 euros, depending on what we did. That's a boatload of money. So we ended up with only using Photoshop or only using Lightroom and maybe Premiere if we could afford it and not update that every time. Now with the subscription, you pay about maybe 12 euros a month and you get Photoshop, Lightroom and a lot of the mobile apps. And they just have a great structure at the moment that everything just works together. So Adobe Creative Cloud without any doubt. Hey, that sounds fun. Now, if you're a big Capture One fan, no problem at all. Capture One is great too. Also use a subscription-based, or you pay a lot of money for updates. So in the end, whichever one you choose, you still pay money. And I think at that point, Adobe just has the best support, has the best video selection online, and the best value for your money. So Adobe Creative Cloud, without any doubt, my advice. And by the way, I do want to add, like, for example, Luminar from Skylum. I use that a lot. So don't think I don't use any other software. Topaz, I love Topaz. But I use those packages inside of Photoshop. So always go into Photoshop, and from Photoshop I use my other plugins. Now my favorite plugins, and you probably already know this, for special effects is without any doubt Boris FX. When you start doing stuff like, for example, sharpening, or if you have an image that's slightly blurred and you want it better, Topaz Photo AI, we recently did a review for that, absolutely awesome. And of course we use exposure software for tinting, and Skylum, for example, for skin retouching, replacing skies, which I never do, but okay, and all the other stuff. So you can still run all those software from Photoshop. So Photoshop is still my hub. But what do I use on the iPad Pro? Well, I do want to shoot Tether to the iPad Pro, and up until a year ago that was actually impossible, unless of course you wanted to shoot with wireless. And I already told you guys that's not reliable on location, so I never shot wireless. Now with the arrival of Cascable, we actually now have an option where you can use your tethered cables and just shoot straight into the iPad Pro or iPad Air. And the software is getting better and better with every release. It's very nice to shoot on location for one very simple reason. If you are in a trade show environment and you don't want people to see your film roll, Cascable has the option to have a dedicated display out. That means that I can still see my whole film roll and everything, but the viewers only see a big screen with only the image, or a histogram if I want it. So it's very configurable. Very nice software. You buy it for a one-time payment for, I believe, 68 euros, which I think is expensive, but it's worth every cent. So check out Cascable. Without any doubt, they are awesome. I've been using them for over a year, and they recently joined us as a supporter. So it's not like, hey, they're a supporter, so Frank promotes it. I was already using it for over a year, and I'm just very glad that they joined Digital Classroom. The other thing is gear. Let's talk a little bit about what we have in our studio. The first thing, of course, is backdrops. We can talk about this long, we can talk about this short. Let's do it short. The backdrop is one of the most important things in your studio, because you don't want the backdrop to go like, hey, I'm here, look at me, I'm more important than the model. But you also don't want the backdrop to go like, oh, I'm not interesting enough. No, you want the backdrop to be somewhere in between. Now, we started distributing ClickProp backdrops a year ago, and we actually started using them, I think, 3 years ago after a demo in South Africa. The thing that really strikes me about all those printed backdrops is that when I place my lighting on it, and I love extreme lighting, extreme angles and everything, I always had this problem with lens flares, with reflections on the backdrop. And it just takes the magic away. If you shoot a bright wall and you have a reflection there, you immediately see, hey, that's final. I don't like that. I want to see a wall. And one of the things that struck me from ClickPro backdrops is actually that you don't see that shine. You can place your lighting on a very extreme angle and you still only see the backdrop. Of course, you see a bright spot. That's normal. That would also happen when you place it on the wall, but you don't see a reflection. The other thing that I really like is the sharpness in the prints, but most of all the pigments they use. When you look at how the backdrops react to lighting, it's very important that the backdrop reacts to the lighting. So if I use blue light, I want the backdrop to respond differently than red light. Let me put it very simple. I don't want a backdrop with a red hue over it or a blue hue over it. I want a backdrop that mixes with those colors. It's very difficult to explain, but as soon as you see my images, you immediately see what I mean. And that means that those backdrops we can use over and over again in different settings and get different results. So you only spend your money once and you get a lot of different options. Now we deliver two different setups. We deliver final for very nice prints and very sharp images and very screaming images. And we deliver Pro Fabric. And Pro Fabric is, I think, one of my favorite materials because it mimics the old painted canvases like Elefante, but they are like 1,000 euros or up. The nice thing about the Pro Fabrics is they have exactly the same qualities, but they don't have the problems with creases or that they start to lose paint, and they are just always nice. Now here's some of you guys going like, Frank, they are very, very expensive compared to the competition. Yes and no. If you go for great backdrops, ClickPro backdrops is actually cheaper than the competition. If you compare it to the cheap stuff, yes, they are way more expensive. But recently Anouk actually found a discussion online about somebody that ordered a printed backdrop. And what was the conclusion? Well, she had a cake smash with a little girl and she painted the whole backdrop with cake. And after that she said, oh, no problem, it's washable. And she did it 3 times and then the print already was gone on those areas. They put it down and yeah, that can happen. No, that cannot happen. When you buy a backdrop, you should be able to make it dirty and clean it again. And clean it again and again and again. Unless, of course, you're using bleach or whatever, then you're asking for it. But a backdrop should be cleanable. A few months ago, we had a photo shoot with a snake in front of a Pro Fabric, and the snake started to urinate. And it was a terrible smell. It also got on the backdrop, and we were really in panic. Like, okay, we can throw this backdrop away. It stinks like crazy. We just emailed Charlie from ClickPro Backdrops like, hey, this happened. After a minute or 10 when he stopped laughing, he said, oh, don't worry, just take some hot water and a cloth and don't do anything else and just clean it off. And it worked. And the backdrop is still hanging there and you don't smell anything. Now when you compare it to paper, I know, paper is very cheap, right? But there's something else. Paper in our studio we can use for maybe 3 or 4 months and then we have to buy a new roll. Shipping those rolls is expensive. And when you add everything up together, in about 1 or 2 years, you spend more money on paper than on a ClickPro backdrops. And now comes the fun part. The ClickPro backdrops, or any printed backdrops, I don't want to talk just about ClickPro backdrops, but it's our brand, so we really like that brand. But any great quality backdrop should last for at least 10, 15, 25 years. And there's something else that a lot of people forget. If you buy a proper backdrop, it always has value when you're done with it. So let's say after 2 years you go like, oh man, I like this print, but I'm totally fed up with it. You sell it. And at that point, try that with paper. Like my paper is all wrinkled up and dirty, sell it. Nobody will buy a paper roll that's not usable anymore. But a lot of people will look for those backdrops secondhand because, well, they're cheaper. And because we know this, and because we know that, of course, for a lot of people it's an investment, it's a new product, we actually started a Facebook group on the clickprepbackdrops.nl where you can actually trade under each other. So if you buy a backdrop, you just go on that Facebook group, you go into the group of discussions, and you can just ask somebody, hey, I have this backdrop, is anybody interested? I want to exchange it for something else. And as a distributor, you can also come to us with your backdrops and we will give you money back for your backdrops and a discount on a new one. Of course, if it's our brand. So, great backdrops. Let's take some look at some images I took with them. I'm not going to stand along with it, but they have more like the traditional backdrops, very vintage backdrops, which I absolutely love. three-dimensional like backdrops, like there's something hanging in front of it, and when you place your lighting correctly, like here, it just looks awesome. They have something like theater doors with graffiti. They have block, which is very, very nice, I think. They have something like a graffiti wall. Think about this when you do families in your studio. This will really give you more revenue because people are fed up with gray backdrops or white backdrops or whatever backdrops. This is so much more nicer. And also remember that when you say like, okay, but I will change the backdrop in Photoshop. Okay, that's okay. But when you use a real backdrop, people can lean against the backdrop. You can use shadows on your backdrop. That's something you can't do when you replace the backdrop in Photoshop. That whole light structure over the backdrop. Maybe some of you guys can do it, like Clint Dewis or Scott Kelby. They can do it, but it takes you way more work than just place somebody in front of that backdrop and use the shadows on the backdrop. It's real. Here we placed it in a corner using one backdrop on this side and one backdrop on that side using some red strobes. Same backdrop. Here we have our vintage backdrop, but now look at this. When I use different light qualities, look at how the backdrop reacts. Do you see that it gives you a totally different look? So when we look at here, it's very soft, it's very nice and mellow in the back. As soon as I start using that red, the pigments just jump out, colors get subdued and other colors get back. That's what I mean. It's so incredibly flexible. Here we see our navy wall, which I really like. And we use that a lot in different setups. And as you can see, it doesn't really jump out as, hey, I'm a backdrop. No, it just fits the mood. And that's what I find very, very important. That's the snake, by the way. Okay, the other thing, and you already knew it, it's the light meter. Now, the light meter isn't one magical tool that will make you a better photographer. It's just a great tool to make you a faster photographer. For the perfect workflow, I think it's vital. Think about this. If you build a house, you don't want your builder to just go like, let's do it like this. I think that's level. No, because then your house will probably fall down. And that's what a light meter does. It doesn't do anything magical. You just hold it in front of the area you want correctly lit. You fire the strobes. That's it. You get 5.62. You go down 2 clicks on your strobes and you're on 5.2. If your strobes go in 1/10 of an increment, of course. So which light meter should you buy? Should you buy the most expensive one, the Iconic 858, which I use? Sure, it's a great light meter, but you don't need that. What I would highly advise is go on Marktplaats, eBay or Craigslist or wherever you want to buy it and find flash meters. So make sure you have a flash meter, not just a light meter. And get a flash meter that has just very simple a display. That's all you need, nothing more. You don't need radio systems. They all have a setting where they just wait for the pulse. So for example, with my Hensel strobes, I don't have a radio transmitter that works with Iconic. I just have an extra remote in my hand. I trigger the light meter, I fire the strobe, and the light meter just meters the light, and I'm done. So brands, Minolta has great light meters. They don't manufacture them anymore, but if you find one, get one. Kenko, which is, I believe, the new owner of Minolta. I don't know for sure. And of course, Iconic. And without any doubt, Iconic is the brand I have been using for many, many years. And we're not sponsored by Iconic. They did give us a light meter, but that was because we did a lot of work for them on a trade show. And they're just one of the most reliable brands, I think. And especially when you have the 858, it is a really nice trick where you can meter the speed of your strobes. And we do a lot of motion. And what I like to know is where is my strobe the fastest? And with the Iconic meter, I can just fire the strobe in several settings. And I can just find out, oh, here it's 1/6000th of a second, here it's 1/3000th of a second. Let's go for that setting. And then just adjust the ISO to get the depth of field that I want. Now, if you think like, hey, that's interesting, but I don't have the money for that device, and I still want to know the speed of my strobes, there's a little trick you can do. Get a normal consumer fan, the fans that you use to cool your body when it's hot. Set it up in your studio and now start with your strobe on the lowest setting. Take a picture of that turning fan. Turn up the strobe 1 stop, take the same picture. 1 stop up, take the same picture, 1 stop up, unless you run out of power, of course. And now just look at those images and you will quickly see like, hey, the strobe is firing faster here, the strobe is firing slower here, because you see more of the movement of your fan. If you shoot motion, I think it's incredibly important that you know where your strobes is the fastest, but also where it's the slowest, because sometimes you want a little bit of a trail when somebody jumps. For example, Light the feet with a slower strobe, light the face with a fast strobe, and you get a beautiful combination of a sharp face and a little bit of a tail on the feet. It's awesome. If you know exactly how to set up your strobes, you don't have to experiment with it. The other thing, of course, is you already know I'm using the iPad Pro a lot on location with Cascable, but you want to make sure that it's secure. Now with a laptop, that's always a problem, because there are no real solutions for a laptop that's 100% secure. There's always the risk of the laptop falling down, especially when you move from location. People will lower the display. If there's a band over it, you will damage your display, or you have to take the band off. All chances of dropping your laptop. So the iPad Pro is awesome. Now, over the years, I've tried many different solutions to hold your iPad secure. I tried solutions from 15 euros, which are total crap, and I tried solutions from 200 euros. And I can already tell you, most of those solutions don't do the things that we want. They're too bulky, they don't have the iPad securely, and it just doesn't work. Until we found out that one of our friends, Modifiers in the Netherlands, they are the distributor in the Netherlands for K&F Concept. We work with them a lot with K&F. But they also have a brand called Ulanzi, and you also see it on the picture. And this one is really cool. It's only 45 bucks. So normally an accessory that will hold an iPad from 1200 euros, for 45 euros, I would not even think about trying it, because this can't be good, right? I don't know how they did it, but this is awesome. I would highly recommend you guys buying this one. Listen to this, it's metal. That's already cool, so it's not plastic. Now, most of those devices work the same way. You just place your iPad, you close it up, you hold it like this, and then you lock it. The problem is, there's always a little bit of play in there, and the iPad isn't 100% secure. So what do? Oh, it's not 100% secure. Let's open it up again. Oh, it's going up again. Okay, let's close it. Oh, the iPad is standing. It just doesn't work. With this one, on the top, there's this little screw, and it works. You have to turn it a lot to only go down a little bit. So what I do is I just open this up. I take my iPad, place it in, I lock it, and there's still a little bit of play, and then I just go like 1, 2, 3, 4, let's see. Yeah, there we go. And it's so secure. We actually tried it out with a pillow on the floor to do this, and it didn't fall out. Don't try that at home, because believe me, it will fall out when you do it. When the pillow is gone, I'm pretty sure it would fall out. But this one is so secure, and it's only 45 bucks, man. It's a no-brainer. Place something underneath with a ball head, and you can actually, on location, like you can see on the picture, I can literally just swivel my iPad any location I want, especially with light hitting it. Awesome solution. I'm only looking, if a manufacturer is looking and is interested, I'm looking for something that you can do in the hot shoe, and that actually has a little bit of a hood over your iPad, so you can actually block the light on your iPad. And it's already here, so I would love for a company to design something where you can literally just block off the light on your iPad. That would make the system totally awesome. Okay, so we did that. Let's go on. The other thing that we get a lot of questions is, hey Frank, on the iPad Pro, we know you use OEC docs or Hyper at home, but what do you do on location with your iPad? Yeah, that's a problem, right? But it isn't anymore, because you also have hubs that you can use on your iPad. For example, again, Hyper makes great modifiers, makes great accessories, that's the word I was looking for your iPad, and of course also for your MacBooks. Now, I'm using a picture of Ugreen, and I don't support Ugreen. I don't tell you guys to buy the Ugreen. I don't even know if this one works, so big disclaimer. I'm using one from... yeah, and I tried to learn it, because yesterday I also couldn't pronounce it. Schmook something. I don't even know the name. It's a brand that they sell on Amazon. It works like a charm, only now, as you can see, sometimes my HDMI drops out. And this is the first time that happens, so probably, I hope it's the cable. The problem is, when you buy these hubs too cheap, you will get problems with failing HDMIs or wired network that doesn't work. So buy one in the 80 to 100 euro range. I find that those are really good. And there's one thing you have to be very careful for. Of course, it's very nice that you have a card reader. I would advise SD or micro SD, but always SD. Of course, you need some normal USB ports and a wired internet connection. I highly recommend it, especially when you work with a NAS system like us. Wi-Fi is great, but wired is just way faster. And now comes the big part. Of course you need HDMI, but you need 2 USB-C ports. Now you might wonder why 2. Remember that the iPad only has 1 USB-C port. So if you want to shoot tethered, you need that 1 USB-C port, of course, to shoot tethered. Well, that's no problem because those hubs also have a USB-C port, so you have a connection, right? Yeah, the thing that most people forget that you also need a battery, because shooting tethered, you can also, especially when you use the IQwire cables, like the boosters inside, I can also charge my camera while shooting, even when I'm shooting on the iPad Pro. But the iPad Pro has a big battery, but not unlimited. So when we're in the studio, we always use a dock that actually has 2 USB-C ports. Now there are many on the market that has 2 USB-C ports. They're not all the same. Buy one that is clearly labeled that one of the USB-C ports also transmits power to your iPad. Because now, the same setup we're using here, I can power my iPad Pro via one USB-C port and shoot tethered via the other. And now I can just forget about everything, charge my camera, charge my iPad, and as soon as I'm done with my photo shoot, I go home, my camera is 100% full, my iPad is 100% full. That really helps for the perfect workflow, because nothing is so terrifying as knowing you only have 9% battery left. That's really terrifying. As strobes, my choice in the studio at this moment is Hensel. I've shot with Ellingham for many, many years, and they're a great brand. Same with Hensel, you get what you pay for, and if people ask me like which brands do you support, without any doubt Hensel and Ellingham, those 2 brands, buy them without thinking about it. They are both great manufacturers, and I think when you work with freezing motion and you use your softboxes a lot, I think Hensel has the edge. They're a little bit faster, especially with recycling and freezing motion, and the modifiers are a little bit better in construction, and they're not that much more expensive. When you go on location, I think Hensel has a great system with the Porty. You have 1200 watts and you have the 14-inch reflector giving you a boatload of light and a lot of strobe light on location, because those batteries run for 260 to 300 shots and they're very easy to replace. Especially when you have cold hands, it's very important that you have a system where you just click on a button, the battery comes out and you push in a new battery and you're done. And you don't have to use it like this and drop a battery out and in the cold. That doesn't really work nicely. So our choice in the studio for strobes is Hensel. But of course we also use LED lighting. And over the years I found out that Nanlite is actually one of the manufacturers that has a really nice lineup, very constant in quality, a little bit more expensive maybe than, for example, Godox, but in all honesty, you get what you pay for, right? And Godox is great, don't get me wrong, but I think Nanlite just has a little bit of the edge in producing the stuff and giving the support and warranties. When you buy the Pavo tubes, the smaller one as you can see on the right, those I really like for shooting action figures or using in a set to really light up those smaller areas. They also have tubes that are a little bit bigger. We got them in, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. They're awesome. They can run on a battery, but they can also run on USB-C power, which in my opinion is important because a photo shoot sometimes isn't done in 15 minutes. You need to shoot for an hour. And then if your battery runs down, the lights go off and you're done, right? Not if you can also run the batteries on continuous power. So when you buy LED lighting and they have a built-in battery, make sure that you can also run those lights with a power connector connected. You might think that's normal, it's not. A lot of those battery-powered lights will not operate also on 230. Make sure that you choose the right one. And with Nanlite, you just know that they run on 230 and on the battery just like they would normally do. So they will charge also the battery while operating. Now they have the smaller ones, and actually you're also looking now at all the lighting in our studio, all the LED lighting is Nanlite. Very good brand, very nice for continuous lighting. Now some people will go like, hey Frank, continuous lighting, is that just as good as strobes? Yes and no. The nice thing about continuous lighting is that you can actually see the result, and with modeling lights that's always a little bit of guesswork because you also have available light. But most of all, the main problem I have with continuous lighting is freezing motion. I just can't freeze motion with continuous lighting. You need f16 on ISO 100 or maybe ISO 800. And when I shoot with strobes, I can get away with 125th of a second for the very simple reason the strobe freezes the motion. But when I'm using continuous lighting, you can't get away with 125th of a second. You need to shoot on 1/2000th at the minimum. And at that point, with continuous lighting, just try it out. You can't shoot f11 or f8 or 5.6 or even f4. You can't shoot that on ISO 100 or 800 with a 2000 second. It doesn't work. So that's why we use strobes. Another brand that we've been using for, I think, over 10 years is Rogue. Rogue Expo Imaging is a company we met the first time, I think, at Photoshop World. And they are very enthusiastic guys, Eric and John. And the thing that really got me was they listened to the photographers. Like when I got my first flash bender, I didn't know them yet. So I got my first flash bender in and I was just going like, this is a really nice product. But you probably know this, right? You get a product, you love the product, you think it's the best product in the world, but. And the problem is everything before but is BS. You're very nice, but. It's a great product, but. There's always something wrong. And with the flash bender, there wasn't a lot wrong, but there were some things where I go like, ooh, if you would add this, that would make it so much handier. This would make it so much easier. So I just dropped them an email and said, hey, I love your product. I'm using it like this, and I showed them some videos. I said, but I would love to have like a fixed material that's a little bit more contrasty than white, but less than silver. And in the end, it ended up by releasing the Frank Doorhoff Flashbender XL3. That's the current version. And it's a soft silver inlay and it has Velcro on all sides. You can get a flash attachment to it for example, a strip light. You can bend it into a snoot. You can make a softbox out of it. And every time I email them with, hey, I have an idea, they immediately email back like, okay, do you have an idea? Let's work on it. And then they print something with a 3D printer. They send it to me. I try it out. Say, oh, I love this. And then the next release will actually have that incorporated. So March last year, a lot of stuff changed for our company. And Rogue actually asked us like, hey, are you willing to do the distribution for Rogue Expo Imaging in the Netherlands? And we immediately jumped at the opportunity and said yes. So although it may seem like I promote Rogue because we are the distributor, that's not 100% true. We've only been a distributor for a year and I've been using and promoting the heck out of them for many years more. On this page you see two of the products we sell the most at the moment. That's the Flashbender, and on the left side you see the Expo disc. Now we already talked about color management, and one of the most important things of course for your camera is that color checker. Now I'm not going to tell you guys that if you buy the Expo disc you don't need a color checker. That's ridiculous. They are totally different products. The color checker is something you use to create a profile and to set your white balance, but it's more to create a profile, and that's incredibly vital. But what if you're on location and you already have a profile for your camera but you need proper white balance? Most cameras will do it okay, but what if okay is not good enough? That's where the Expo disc comes in. Most cameras have a setting for auto white balance and custom white balance. You go into your menu for custom white balance, you take the Expo disc, it's almost one size fits all, you hold it in front of your lens and you simply just press OK, custom white balance. It will set the white balance, you take the Expo disc off, you press OK again to store it, and after that you shoot it, and in Lightroom you just select as shot as your white balance, and you have perfect white balance. Of course you can also use the Expo disc in a way that it wasn't designed for, overexpose it by 3 stops, shoot on f22, and you will see exactly where all the dust is on your sensor, but don't tell anybody else that trick. Now we recently started something and that literally blew my mind. I will upload the video this afternoon. Phones. I really love my Samsung S22 Ultra. It creates beautiful shots. But there's one thing that I absolutely disgust in it, and that's the colors. Now, I already made a profile with the color checker, and that changed a lot. And that actually got me thinking, like, okay, what if I use the profile from my color checker, but what if I'm outside and I want proper white balance? Because that's where the camera goes wrong all the time. Sometimes it goes great, most of the times it just misses it by an inch. And then later on in Photoshop or Lightroom, you have to adjust that. So I started a very simple experiment. Shoot on RAW, first image, put the Expo disc in front of it, overexpose it by 1 or 2 stops, click, take the Expo disc off, and just shoot. It doesn't have any custom white balance in the Samsung, which I think is a shame. It does in the professional camera RAW, but I don't use that. The difference is too small. The cool thing is, in Lightroom, you just open up the first image with the Expo disc, and all the images after that, you just sync with the Expo disc. So you go to the Expo disc image, custom white balance in Lightroom. It sets the custom white balance, and now you copy it to all the other photos and you're done. So the Expo disc for, I believe, 50 euros. It's a great tool for even your mobile phone. So if you are a mobile phone photographer, buy an Expo disc and get much better colors. The other thing that I really like about Rogue is also that they think about other stuff. Like for example, when they ask me like, hey Frank, do you ever use reflectors? I told them like, no. The reason is very simple. I hate those round reflectors. I don't know if you have the same problem, but every time when I use a round reflector, it gets into the picture, because I have to place it close to our model. When I hold it underneath, it bends over. When I place it on a stand, it bends over. And I don't use the maximum surface because it's round. And they told me like, what if we give you a rectangular reflector? Now my ears went up and I was going like, really? That's cool. So a few years ago, they actually sent me the first prototype of the rectangular reflector, and I've been using it a lot. The nice thing about the rectangular reflector is you can place it on a stand and it doesn't bend over because, hey, it's rectangular. But you can also have somebody hold it next to your model very close without it being in the picture. You have to angle it a little bit better than a round one, of course, because you have less surface, but also underneath the chin. Think about this. Now you get way more light, because normally with the round one, you can only use that top part of the round to get light back into the face. With the rectangular, you can just shove it under her chin and just get the full brightness in her face. And that's amazing from the rectangular reflector. So really cool, and that's what I mean about gear that is designed for photographers and not just to sell. On the left side you see our new umbrella system. Now that one is a funny story. When I started out with Rogue, they asked me like, hey, what do you use, and also do you use umbrellas? I said, umbrellas, they are for the rain. And this is really simple to explain. Every time when you start with a strobe set, what is the first modifier you get? An umbrella, right? But at that point you don't control your lighting yet. So what do you do with your umbrella? You probably mess up the lighting, because an umbrella is very hard to control. The light goes everywhere, right? So the umbrella sucks. Then you get a new softbox and immediately your images jump out, it's better, it's easier to control. Wow, the softbox is great. And then you learn even more. And the more you learn to control your lighting. And now maybe you're at that point where you can use your reflector and a grid and have total control over your lighting. And you never think about that stupid umbrella anymore, right? Well, as I told you guys, starting March last year, we became the distributor. And Rogue actually has a great new umbrella out there. And one of the biggest problems with umbrellas is they break down really easily. So they solved it by using fiber. So having a fiberglass umbrella is really great because they're very durable, they're very lightweight. And let's be honest, on location, you don't want to drag around a softbox. An umbrella is way easier. So I thought, you know what? Let's just make a video about it and let's see what we can do with that stupid umbrella. Dudes, guys, girls, listen to me. When you start using a modifier like an umbrella with the knowledge you have now, oh my, they are so incredibly flexible. You can make nice beauty portraits like a beauty dish with an umbrella by taking the sleeve off and using silver. You can create a beautiful, beautiful side light like a strip light by using the sleeve on it and just feathering it away. The nice thing about an umbrella, when you feather it away, you also get lens flare. But you can also block that off if you don't want it. How about this? In a lot of images, I use filling strobes. Normally, I use a 1.2 meter softbox for filling strobes. That's insane. It's an 800 euro softbox. It's huge. It takes up a lot of space. If you use an umbrella, it's like 60 bucks and you have no problem at all because it's small and you can use it as filling flash. Now for you guys, what is filling flash? If you have a very high contrast image and the shadows are a little bit too dark, you can of course open it up in Lightroom with the shadow slider, but then you also lose contrast in the face. You can of course black it off with a mask, but that's a lot of work. When you use something like an umbrella or a softbox and you place that 3 or 4 stops below the main light, you get just enough shadow detail to make those images really pop. It's a huge difference in three-dimensionality. So the umbrellas, we started experimenting with it, and now almost every image you see from me, I think 80% uses that umbrella in one form or another. Now they deliver 2 umbrellas. The black one with a sleeve, that's the one I use as a replacement for a 1.2 meter softbox. It's soft and it can be harsh, it can be a strip light and it can be really focused or broad light. They also deliver wide umbrellas. They're a little bit smaller. Now think about this for a lighting setup. If you still shoot wide backdrops on wide seamless, you need to get it perfectly 4 strobes in my setup, or actually 5. 2 on the backdrop, 2 accent lights on our model and 1 main light. So that's 5 strobes. 5 strobes to set up, 5 strobes that will cost you money. If you set it up with an umbrella, you're done with 3. Listen to this. You use the wide umbrella and you aim it correctly at the backdrop. Now you use 2 umbrellas for the backdrop, but because the umbrella also reflects light back, if you angle them correctly, you can also use them as an accent light on your model. And now you use the black umbrella in the front as your main light source. So in other words, 2 wide umbrellas using the same as 4 normal strobes. And then of course the strobe in the front. The total set is about 119 euros in the Netherlands. And I believe the wide umbrella is about 30 euros, Anouk? 30, 35 euros, the white one?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So for under 150 euros, you have a complete setup that replaces 5 strobes in a wide seamless backdrop, of course. So umbrellas, make sure you check them out. Very, very handy. And it totally changed my opinion on it, by the way. And it's not because we sell them, because for us it's a product in many products, but it just opened up my eyes, like how flexible those umbrellas are if you use them with the knowledge we have now. Another thing that I highly recommend for anybody out there that's using the round strobes or speed lights. Now it's about the perfect workflow. What is the most frustrating part when you're on location? You have to bring a lot of gear if you want to do a lot of creative stuff. You need to bring gels, you need to bring grids, you need to bring a snoot, you need to bring a softbox, you need omnidirectional light, you need focus light. On location it can be a total disaster, especially when you do events or weddings, or maybe you want with a model on location. And this is where I love the magnetic system. As you can see here on the image, they have a very simple grid. And they're stackable because they're magnetic. So if you like the beam like this, you use 1, 2, 3, or maybe even 4 or 5. And 5 is ridiculous, but okay. The other one that I really like is the dome. I'm going to show you a few images in a moment where I use the dome as fill-in flash. What we use the dome for is actually we place it approximately 2 or 3 meters away from our model, and we use one of the gel holders underneath the dome. And because the dome is omnidirectional, it creates light that hardly gives you any shadow, especially when you aim it up. And that gives you the beautiful, beautiful fill-in strobe with a gel, which is very hard to recreate with, for example, a harder light source or a bigger light source, because you get shadows and you see that light source. So something like a dome works like a charm for that, and it's also a very nice broad light source for soft portraits. And the other thing that's brand new, that's the snoot. And as you can see, I love materials that you can use in many different ways. The snoot has 3 numbers on it, 1, 2, and 3. And that means that you might think you can use it in 3 different ways. So a broad beam, smaller and smaller. You can also use it collapsible. So I always say we have 4 options. Collapsible, 1, 2, 3, and you're done. But now comes the fun part. The system is designed for round strobes. So that means if you use a speed light, you don't have a round strobe, right? You have a rectangular strobe. So for a speed light with the snoot, we always advise to use a gel holder with a small diffusion panel that's round, and that actually creates a round light source. And now you have a snoot with a round light source. So you have 4 different options. But what about if you don't use that little simple gel? Well, now you have a rectangular light source. And that is so incredibly cool, because now you have a very distinct, like almost a line over the model's eyes. Think about those old Star Trek series, like the original series. When you see Kirk walking around, he always has that light over his eyes, you know. Everything is nicely lit, but his eyes just light up a little bit more. Look at the old glamour photography like Harcourt or George Horrell. They all play with light that is a little bit more rectangular and really makes a model jump out. So by using the snoot on a speed light with a rectangular strobe and without the diffusion panel, you get exactly that effect. So 1 snoot, 8 different options on a speed light. On a round strobe, only 4. And it works, by the way, on all different strobes that are round. So Godox, Profoto, Geigoko, I believe, Geigoko, whatever, and all different other strobes that are round. And if you don't have a round strobe but a rectangular strobe, like speed lights, there's a converter for small and normal. Most people will use normal. So you place that on your speedlight, as you can see in the image, and then you click the magnetic system on it and you just build from that. Nice thing is that it's affordable and it's very, very tiny. So you can just put it in your pocket during a photo shoot, but you still get the quality of much bigger devices because the dome makes light omnidirectional. And that's the trick. And I know a lot of questions are about that dome, like how can a small light source become bigger? And I think you guys have to realize that it's not only surface. Like when I look at softboxes, it's always flat, right? So the bigger the softbox, the softer the light. But when you look at something like a dome, you still have a very small light source. But because the dome is round, the light doesn't just travel through the dome, but it also goes from the sides. And that just gives you a much broader light source, especially when you feather it a little bit. Very cool stuff. These are some images with the umbrella. This is with the umbrella as filling light, and now you see what I mean, and just open up the shadows a little bit. So everything else is normal strobes from Hensel, but I'm using that umbrella to just open up the shadows. Normally I would take the same image, but it would look a little bit flatter because I need to open up those shadows. And this is just a way better solution. This is, I believe, with the snoot. This is with the snoot. This is with the flash bender, I think, and we're using the dome with the blue gel. So now you can see what I mean with that blue gel. Here we are using red from one side and probably the umbrella on the other. Same here. A little bit more with Photoshop. Same technique here. You see that the model was wearing a white dress. You can still see that it's a white dress. There's no blue infection in the white itself, but on the bottom you see that there's an infection. That's because the light is hitting the model, creating a nice vignette. So the bottom part is darker than the middle part. By using that blue gel on a very, very low setting, you can literally control which part of the shadows get that blue tint. Now, if you use Luminar IE or you use Photoshop, you can also do something with selective tinting. For example, the shadows, we need a little bit more blue. The highlights, we need something else. It's something similar to that. The only problem is that it looks a little bit artificial when you do it in Photoshop. When you do it on set, you have way more control by just lowering the output of the strobes. It will go deeper into the shadows. By raising the output of the strobe, you get a little bit more of that medium gray, medium shadow area. It's a technique I absolutely love to use. The disadvantage is you can't correct it later in Photoshop. And when you do it with software, you can of course correct it. But hey, what's the fun in that? You have to do it in camera. Same here, using that blue gel, but now in a very, very low setting. So now it doesn't affect the model at all, but it does affect the backdrop and gives you a totally different use of that backdrop. And same here. So just some images that we shot with the Rogue gear. And I just love the soft quality of light you can get from it. And this is with the snoot. And do you see that rectangular part? This is where I intentionally didn't use the diffusion panel. So it just creates a very striking, harsh image, which I absolutely love. Okay, so I think we talked a lot about the perfect workflow. Let's recap it a little bit. The most important thing in a perfect workflow is that you guys find what works for you. But most of all, you can only spend your money once. Now, I of course promoted a lot of the brands that I use. The 3 brands that we distribute is actually IQwire, Rogue, and ClickPro backdrops. But it doesn't mean that we promote those products in this broadcast because we promote those products because we sell them. We sell those products because we already use them for many years and we trust those brands and we know those brands are great and they give the solution that we need. It doesn't make sense for me to promote one brand and then use another one because the brand I promote doesn't really do the stuff that I need. So that's why we actually sell the brands that we promote. It's the perfect combination, right? I love something and then we sell it. If you have any questions about this, leave comments below. I hope this broadcast went way better than yesterday with all the internet problems. And I think that's the perfect conclusion for this episode actually. Always make sure that you guys know what you're doing, know your gear, know exactly how your strobes work, know how a softbox operates, know how fast your strobe goes. And then when you have technical difficulties, you still stress out, but at least you don't have to think about all the other stuff and you can just let go. And as you saw yesterday, sometimes everything is in order. We have the perfect setup here. We have perfect internet and still the internet failed and we can do the whole live stream again. So in the end, technique can fail, Just make sure that you know how the technique works, so you don't blame yourself. Thank you so very much for watching, guys. We will be online again, I think, in a few weeks with another digital classroom on a week, and then it will be with a model. Okay, for you guys, leave comments below what you want to see us do in the next digital classroom. Do you want to see us do something with broad light or with soft light, in other words? Do you want to see something with harsh lighting quality, like for example classical masters? Or do you want to maybe see a whole episode about retouching or street photography? Let us know in the comments below and we will do exactly what you guys want. Most votes count. And don't forget, fun with Calibrite. Thank you so very much for watching, guys. See you again next time. Bye bye.